The five worst presidents for black people's lives, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Let's see here. From permitting black codes to creating a pathway for Klan terrorism, these five presidents created unjust and dangerous situations for black Americans. Dr. Robert C. Smith, an African American politics expert, opined, segregation is not a humiliation but a benefit and ought to be so regarded by you, gentlemen. If your organization goes out and tells the colored people of this country that it is a humiliation, they will so regard it. The only harm that will come will be if you cause them to think it's a humiliation. And that was Woodrow Wilson. Wilson spoke those words during an exchange at the White House with a delegation of black citizens led by journalist William Monroe Trotter, who balked at Wilson's approval of resegregating civil service employees. According to the book Presidents in Black America, a documentary history which authors Stephen A. Jones and Eric Friedman wrote about for the website The Conversation. Since America gained its independence in 1776, the nation has been seeing 46 men serve as president. These men have taken the country from its founding years to freeing enslaved people, to passing finally civil rights legislation, and to removing some institutionalized barriers to opportunity. Along the way, some presidents have been openly hostile to black people. Some have used the federal government's might to help deny black people freedom and equality. Dr. Robert C. Smith, Professor Emeritus at San Francisco State University, is a renowned expert on African American politics who has written 10 books and scores of papers. He shared his thoughts in no particular order on the worst presidents for black people. You can find a list here of best presidents here. The opinions below are Smith's words, and the conversation has been edited for brevity and clarity. Andrew Johnson, 17th president, 1865 to 1869. He didn't stand in the way when states implemented the black codes that limited the rights of people recently freed from enslavement. Johnson was an overt white supremacist and racist. He said openly in his state papers that Africans were inferior people and therefore should be held in a subordinate position to white people. There should not be equality between the races. He said to the southern white people, "We are going to leave you alone, and you can do with your emancipated slaves whatever you wish." And of course, what they wished was to keep black people in as much slavery as the 13th Amendment, which outlawed slavery, permitted. And so states under Johnson's watch instituted the black codes, slavery by another name. The black codes were enacted by southern states during Reconstruction to limit the rights of black people. And there's Andrew Johnson. Johnson vetoed the first Civil Rights Act passed by Congress in 1875. Congress overrode his veto. When Congress passed civil rights legislation, he refused to enforce it and violated his constitutional oath to see to it that the laws were executed faithfully. That was one of the reasons Congress impeached him, and he came within one vote of being removed from office. Ronald Reagan, 48th president, 1981 to 1989, he used conservatism as an excuse not to use the federal government to improve the lives of black people. Reagan's racism emanated not from racial animus per se, but from his rigid adherence to this conservative ideology, the notion of limited government, and the belief that government should not try to correct social conditions. We are still living to an extent with Reagan, particularly in the Republican Party. But then, the general public, there is still this sense that the government should not do anything to address the problems of poverty, especially in black America. That's one of the legacies of Ronald Reagan. Rutherford B. Hayes, president from 1877 to 1881. He agreed to withdraw federal troops from the South to secure his presidency. That action resulted in Ku Klux Klan terrorism against black people and white supremacy in the South. Hayes, a Civil War general, was a reasonably liberal politician on race, but he agreed in 1877 to the withdrawal of the last of the federal troops in the southern states who protected the rights of the newly emancipated persons. This led to Ku Klux Klan terrorism and a concerted effort to reduce black people to a near-slavery capacity in terms of labor and taking away their right to vote. So we have Woodrow Wilson, 28th president, 1913 to 21. He instituted segregation in the federal government's civil service jobs, taking away valuable employment opportunities for black people. Wilson was a white supremacist and a racist. He believed black people should be held in subordinate positions to whites. Prior to his presidency, black people and white people in civil service in Washington worked in an integrated setting. He came in and imposed complete segregation. He set into motion a process that eventually led to a fairly significant decline in the number of black people in civil service employment. Donald Trump, 40th president, 2017-2021. He has institutionalized white nationalism into the Republican Party and to some extent the country, which puts black people at risk. Trump institutionalized in the Republican Party and to some extent the nation white Christian nationalism. White nationalist politics claim the resources are going more to black people than they are to white people. His supporters are particularly concerned, of course, about immigration, which Trump made the theme of this campaign. He said to get rid of the Haitians, get rid of the Salvadorians, and try to find some Norwegians to immigrate to America. Implicitly, he's setting up this notion of a racist hierarchy between white people and then the rest of the world. Okay, so there's another article here. It says, Professor holds this truth to be self-evident. Lincoln tops list of 5 best presidents for black people. Presidents who fought for the equal rights Safety and representation of black Americans had a lasting effect on their lives. Let us close the springs of racial poison. Let us pray for wise and understanding hearts. Let us lay aside irrelevant differences and make our nation whole. Lyndon B. Johnson, upon signing the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Independence Day is a time to reflect on the birth of the United States and everything that has come in the 246 years since, including the 46 men who have served as president. Some of them stood in the way of progress. Woodrow Wilson, for example, mandated segregation in the federal workforce. Other presidents fought for equality, and they have proven to be the best presidents for black people. Stephanie Williams, a former staff assistant to the late Senator Ted Kennedy, teaches issues related to race in the Honors College at the University of South Florida. The Griot asked for her opinion on the best U.S. presidents for black America. Her opinions of the best presidents in order are below, and in her words. Okay, so let's see. She said Abraham Lincoln, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 that freed enslaved people in areas controlled by the Union Army and many southern states. The document served as the foundation for the 13th Amendment, which was adopted in 1865. His capacity to have empathy, his willingness to listen, to meet with Frederick Douglass and black troops, and to have an appreciation for the commitment of the black troops makes him the first consequential president for black people. It's not just freeing black people from slavery, it was the willingness to see black people as human beings when other presidents clearly did not. Let's see here. Ulysses Grant. Ulysses Grant was a general in the American Civil War. He stood up to the Ku Klux Klan, which was emboldened by Andrew Johnson, Grant's predecessor. He had taken positions against the Klan, calling them dangerous, condemning their behavior, calling them vigilante criminals. He had an appreciation for the black troops as he was leading the Union Army in the Civil War. I think that he was disturbed by some of the rolling back of Reconstruction and seeing that black people were headed for some very difficult times. Teddy Roosevelt, 1901 to 1909, the 26th president. He had an appreciation for HBCUs and their contributions and sought out black leaders. He evolved in some ways. He had an appreciation for HBCUs because he was really interested in seeing the training that black colleges were doing in the South. He visited Tuskegee. He was getting to know black leaders, developing conversations with them. One of the toughest things African Americans have in the United States is presidents who are willing to sit down and talk, listen to their perspective, and get ideas about policy from them. He had a willingness to have black people work in the government and after he left, Woodrow Wilson kicked them all out. So there was some progress under Roosevelt, and this Roosevelt was a Republican, Theodore Roosevelt. Lyndon Johnson, 36th president, 1963 to 1969. In addition to shepherding the Civil Rights Act, he also pushed through the Voting Rights Act of 1965. When you think about the war on crime, some of the policies start with LBJ, but the Voting Rights Act has to put him in the top. That was the major fight that we had. Voting rights and access to accommodations. Barack Obama, 44th president, 2009, 17. He was the country's first black president, and that representation matters. Representation does matter. I think his ability to articulate some complexities about racial disagreements and conditions helped a lot. Look at his investments in HBCUs and healthcare. It's scary to think how many people would have been dead if he didn't have Obamacare when COVID-19 started. He appointed a lot of federal judges, which, while diversifying agencies and hiring people who had an interest in black communities, there was a lot of good that Obama could do, even though he was hampered significantly by Republicans. So we're ending right there. You have both sides. The president that did the most harm to black people, and the president that did the most good for black people. Theodore Roosevelt was one of them, and he goes back to the early 20th century.